Vai.
Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite a todos em diferentes localidades. Eu sou Cristina Gomes e, em nome do grupo de pesquisa PEUL, dou boas-vindas a todos. Vamos dar início ao nosso webinário Variação, Mudança e Gêneros Textuais Discursivos, Pesquisa Básica, Aplicação ao Ensino e outras interfaces. Hello, everyone. On the behalf of the research group PEUL at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, I would like to welcome you all to the webinar Variation, Change, and Text Genre, Basic Research Application to Teaching and Other Interfaces. This morning in USA, afternoon in Brazil, and evening in France, I'm very pleased to introduce Susan Herring, who kindly accepted the invitation to open this webinar with her talk entitled Graphicon Variation and Change, the Evolution of Emoji. She holds the position of professor at the Indiana University, Bloomington, in the Department of Information and Library Science. It's not easy to summarize her CV. I can say that she has received many honors and grants, and she has a long time of research experience, more than 30 years, on a wide range of subjects, including structural, pragmatic, interactional, and social phenomena in computer-mediated communication. She has more than 100 publications concerning her research field, among books, book chapters, peer-reviewed articles, and as editor of journal issues. Professor Susan Herring, main research areas are technologically mediated communication, multimodal discourse, and gender and digital technology. She is interested in understanding and describing the nature of these phenomena, their effects on interpersonal interaction, and their social impacts. She also studied telepresence robot-mediated interaction, and according to her own words, she is fascinated by the concept of holographic telepresence. Recently, she has been thinking about the future of technologically mediated communication, particularly the integration of artificial intelligence into human-human communication. So at this point, I would like to invite Professor Susan Herring to join us and give her talk.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, Professor. That's
yes,
okay.
Very good. So my name is Susan Herring, and I'm a linguist by training who studies language and communication mediated by digital technologies. One of the themes of this webinar, Language Variation and Change, is something I've been interested in since I was a graduate student long ago. I've studied language change in ancient Tamil, which is a Dravidian language spoken in the south of India, from 2,000-year-old documents, as well as on the internet when it was less than 25 years old. Recently, I've been interested in graphical means of communication on the internet, which is the topic of this presentation. Specifically, I focus on the evolution of emoji. First, some background on language change. It's been observed that the pace of language change is accelerated on the internet. In my adult lifetime, online communication has added many new words to the lexicon, such as blog, netizen, defriend, and LOL, as well as new word formatives, such as the prefix E in email and e-commerce, and the prefix cyber in cyberspace and cyber attack. Even there's been some syntactic innovation. In English, for example, we have the non-standard constructions because internet, or because tired, or because ha ha ha. and I can't even. Why should language change more quickly online? Well, one reason is that the internet is a situation of massive language contact between speakers from different language communities. And there's also the massive amount of communication that takes place online. But another reason has to do with the textual nature of most computer-mediated communication up to this point, which leaves a persistent record. And this persistent record, on the one hand, promotes metalinguistic awareness and language play, because as you're typing, you can see your words, and they're more amenable to being manipulated for playful reasons, but also because language change becomes much more accessible to study. As Dieter Stein wrote in 2006, the internet provides a unique window on the microstructure of linguistic change. There have been two main approaches to researching language change thus far. The first is the diachronic or real-time approach. Involves where language use is sampled at different points in time and changes inferred from differences between the samples. Typically, these studies involve longitudinal design and involve examining historical records. There's also the synchronic or apparent time approach, where language use is examined at a particular point in time, and that's usually the present time, and change is inferred from differences in attitudes and use across populations and contexts, particularly across demographic groups by gender and age. These studies typically involve cross-sectional designs at a particular point in time, and their data are existing evidence plus surveys, interviews, focus groups, and so forth, other ways of asking people what they do rather than looking at what they do. And these approaches have been distinguished by Bill Labov in 1972 and Guy Bailey in 2002. Both approaches have some limitations. Diachronic studies are often limited by rare or discontinuous data, and historical documents usually lack social context. But conversely, synchronic studies lack time depth and can only infer change rather than demonstrating it. Luckily for us, the internet enables both approaches at the same time. Data are available from the past at a time depth now of approximately 45 years. And you may say, if you're a historical linguist, that that's not very long. But keep in mind that language does change more quickly online. And also, more or less continuous data are theoretically available across populations and contexts. And in addition, because this change is happening now and it's happening quickly, we can directly observe changes that are taking place in our lifetimes, which is pretty great. So there have been a few studies of language change on the internet. The ones I'm aware of are in English. I myself conducted a study back in 1998 of the Message Group, which was the very first email mailing list on the internet. It started in 1975 and went until 1986. There was the same moderator continuously throughout that period. And they had the idea that what they were doing was historically important. And so they archived all of their messages. So we have a continuous sample during that time. My study focused on informality, politeness and impoliteness, and syntactic complexity. And what I found was that over that time period, things that increased were informality and face-threatening acts. And what decreased was positive politeness. There was no change in syntactic complexity. 20 years later, Ellie Borlai wrote her doctoral dissertation doing a historical survey of language use on Usenet, which was later became Google Groups, between 1982 and 2007, so a 25-year period. She used the automated Luke software, that's linguistic inquiry and word count, and looked at the frequency of words and semantic categories. She also broken down by gender. And what she found in her large textual corpus was an increase over time in informality, sort of continuing the trend that I identified earlier, an increase in swear words, negation, affective processes in general, second-person pronouns, and emoticons. Whereas what decreased were words expressing cognitive processes, causation, and insight, first-person pronouns, and then grammatical function words like prepositions, articles, interrogatives, quantifiers, and exclamation points. So both of these studies focused on textual CMC, which is natural because that was all that was available at that time. However, as the internet has evolved over the years, and particularly over the past 20 years, CMC has been becoming increasingly multimodal. And one phenomenon that has become particularly widespread is what we call graphicons. Graphicons are graphical icons such as emoticons, emoji, stickers, GIFs, and image memes that are used in computer-mediated discourse, in conversational exchanges online. The term itself was coined by Herring and Danis in 2017 as an umbrella term for all of these different phenomena. And what Herring and Danis did was looked at Graphicon types, the functions of Graphicon types in Facebook groups. And they found, in terms of the frequency of these different types, that emoji were far and away the most frequent. 68.9% of all instances in our data there. We had about 1,000 roughly instances of Graphicons in the data. Almost 70% were emoji, followed by emoticons at about 12%, images at about 10%, stickers about 8%, video clips about 1.7%, GIFs 0.2%. GIFs were not supported in Facebook comment threads at that time. So because emoji is far and away the most important type, I went on then in subsequent work together with Ashley Danis to look at emoji themselves. And also I've been studying emoji sequences with a Chinese collaborator, Jingji, looking at them on the Sina Weibo platform. So with regard to emoji and language change, the questions that we would like to see answered are, how have they evolved or how have they changed over time? And what do these trends suggest about where they are headed in the future? And so what I'm going to talk about from now on is two things. First of all, sort of the big picture evolutional tendencies of Graphicons, and particularly emoji relative to stickers and emoticons, and also emoji's independent evolution as a language, or what we might call, more properly call, a pre-language. So let's start with Graphicon evolution. This gives the big picture. I did a study recently with some colleagues at Facebook, Artie Conrad and David Choi, where we looked at Graphicon use in Facebook Messenger. And we looked at emoticons, emoji, and stickers, and these are some examples of what those look like on Facebook Messenger. And we posited an evolutionary trajectory that involves three basic phases. This was derived from work in art history, which shows that genres of art tend to go through three phases: an early phase where they start to become popular, a high phase, which is the peak of their popularity and creativity, and then a period of decline, which is accompanied by conventionalization and stylization. The art becomes more trite and more mundane. Now, we took this and thought, well, this seems like it could apply to Graphicons, particularly where we're thinking about emoticons. But we can also say that emoji and stickers could be situated along this trajectory. So emoticons would be in the decline phase because they're not used as much anymore, and their use has been pretty effectively bleached of its emotional expression. Emoji, we posited, were in the high phase, the peak of popularity, and stickers in the West, at least in North America, are more in the early phase, not yet highly popular. And these positions are supported by the dates when they were introduced. So in Facebook Messenger, emoticons were introduced in 2004. Of course, we know emoticons have been around since longer than that, since around 1976 to be exact, or 1978, I think. Emoji were first introduced on Facebook Messenger in 2010, and stickers were introduced there in 2013. This study was conducted in the summer of 2015, when stickers were still quite new. And what we did to try to examine these trends more closely was conduct a study using apparent time methods. That is to say that the methods we used were an adaptation of the apparent time method that's used in sociolinguistics, which considers patterns of usage as well as factors such as social distance and attitude, and makes use of interview and survey methods. So we looked at English-speaking Facebook Messenger users. We conducted 13 in-person interviews and 2,200 approximately surveys, well, or 2 surveys actually, one of sticker users and one of emoji users, and got 2,275 survey responses. The participants were roughly 1/3 female. The age range between 18 and 47, with an average age of around 29 for the surveys. And what we asked them was about their attitudes towards emoji and stickers, and their reasons for the use and non-use of emoji and stickers with reference to their most recent emoji or sticker that they had sent. So they would go back in their phones, or they would tell us in the surveys, what was the last emoji or the last sticker that I sent, and who would I send it to? What was your mood at the time, and how close were you to that recipient? What was the nature of your relationship with that recipient? And what we found comparing emoji and stickers was that there were a lot of overlapping functions. Both of these Graphicon types express emotion, emphasize the message, make conversations fun, people said, add cuteness, are used in reciprocal exchanges, and so forth. We did not find clear patterns of gender and age, but we did find differences in intimacy and mood. So, for example, one male commented, "For less close friends, I would more likely use emojis. Stickers come out sometimes as loud and overly expressive, which I wouldn't do in person with a distant friend." Or, as a female commented, "I'll use stickers in more light conversations, like if it's a joke between me and my friends." So talking about both intimacy and mood there. And then another man said, "I'm still going to be less likely to use an emoji if I'm depressed or in a bad mood, but maybe a little more likely to use an emoji than to use a sticker if I'm in a bad mood." And so we can now add these additional findings to the 3 phases of Graphicon evolution, and say, for example, that intimate relationships are associated with the early phase. So when these Graphicons are brand new, they tend to be used pretty much exclusively with intimates, that is to say, significant others and best friends, maybe with close siblings. But as they become over time and become more widespread and more mundane, they can be used with anyone. And I think we're pretty much at that phase with emoticons, at least in North America. And then we could also say that the mood of the sender is correlating here with these trends as well, so that in the early phases, they are sent really just exclusively to indicate strongly positive, playful moods. We could say they're pragmatically marked for this kind of emotional positivity and playfulness, whereas as they decline in use and become more banal, they can be sent in a wider range of moods, pretty much any moods. What about emoji versus emoticons then? Well, they can be compared as well. And they have a lot of overlaps in functions as well. So both emoji and ASCII emoticons express emotion. They express gestures like winking and waving, and they indicate the tone or the intended illocutionary force of the text that they accompany when they follow a textual utterance. But there are differences as well. Emoji are more popular now and have largely displaced emoticons in use on social media platforms. Also, emoticons have undergone conventionalization and a semantic bleaching, or pragmatic bleaching, we could say, such that they are primarily used like punctuation nowadays and to indicate the mood of the utterance. Whereas emoji are also developing punctuation-like uses, but they're not developed to the same extent. But we do see emoji in our data that are used, for example, hearts and flowers especially, that are used like punctuation at the end of emoji sequences as well as at the end of textual sequences. Also, the pragmatic meanings of playfulness, emotionality, and indexing social intimacy are starting to weaken with emoji, consistent with the tendency for words expressing strong emotions to bleach over time. So we ended up elaborating on the original model of the three-phase model by saying that there are these other correlates, such as usage, for example, the tendency to move from pragmatically marked to pragmatically unmarked, less emotionally intense, than can be used in semi-formal messages with distant relationships, as well as distinguishing more fine-grained stages. And so there's behaviors here that also correlate with these phases, such as initial innovation, of course, and then some highly variable use, rise in popularity and frequency of use, and then overlap in meaning and function with older forms. And we can sort of see that for all three of the Graphicon types that we looked at. And then at the more advanced stages, there's displacing older forms, which is characteristic of emoji, and conventionalization, bleaching, and broadening of meanings, which is characteristic of both emoticons and emoji. And finally, the last stage, declining popularity and frequency of use. But emoji are more complicated than the other Graphicon types in this model. First, they're not declining in popularity or frequency of use, although the model predicts that they eventually will, and perhaps they will eventually, but there's no sign of it yet. On the contrary, their use is spreading globally. And there's even evidence of independent evolution of emoji as a new language or pre-language, which we're not seeing with the other Graphicon types. And so I want to talk to you now about emoji as language. Starting several years ago, journalists in particular, and even some linguists, started to claim that emoji were language or language-like. For example, Dobble in 2015 wrote, "Emoji is the fastest growing form of language in history, based on its incredible adoption rate and speed of evolution." And I et al. Wrote in 2017 that emojis have become a universal language that is used across apps, across platforms, and across cultures. But there are also a number of linguists who say this is not correct. For example, Derscheid and Siever wrote in 2017 that emoji cannot become a language at all, as it's not possible to convey complex matters using only emoji. And Gown and McCulloch recently wrote that typical uses of emoji are more similar to gesture than to language. I myself, a few years ago, when I was interviewed by Wired magazine about this question, expressed the view that I did not think that emoji were a language because they lacked certain grammatical categories, grammatical function words, and morphosyntactic categories such as tense and aspect and case and mood. However, I changed my view based on the research that I did. But we can summarize some of the arguments against emoji as language from linguists as follows. So first of all, Derscheid and Siever said that sequences consisting only of emojis lack possibilities of expression that are inherent to alphabetical writing. They are not like alphabetical writing. Cohn said that emoji do not allow building units from parts. Derscheid and Siever again said that important information needed to construct a sentence, such as tense, mode, and case, cannot be represented through emojis. And Cohn, again, says that linear order follows the agent-action pattern, which is cognitively based rather than evidence of grammar. So that is to say subject-verb order. And finally, Cohn doubts that emoji would be able to create embedded clauses. So which view is correct? Let's look at the evidence. First of all, I want to say a word about my data sources. All of the examples that I'm going to present are tested examples. I did not make anything up. We drew sources from examples from the study that I did with Ashley Danis about emoji in Facebook comment threads. Also from the work that I've done with Jing Ji on Sina Weibo, the Chinese microblogging platform Sina Weibo, which is sometimes called the Chinese Twitter. And then I supplemented these with Google image searches for terms like emoji language, emoji conversation, emoji sentences, emoji phrases, and so forth. And one of the things that I encountered that was especially useful was the Nebo blog, and in particular an entry where they provide a sentence-by-sentence breakdown in English of an all-emoji blog post that they had previously written, which is nice kind of data because they wrote the emoji, and so that's their authentic emoji production, and then they later obligingly translated it for me into English. I was very grateful. So, based on these sources, I will present evidence that emoji are developing into a linguistic system, complete with a lexicon or vocabulary, semantics or meaning, morphology or word formation processes, syntax or sentence formation rules, discourse markers, and pragmatic non-literal uses. And let's start with, at a very basic level, emoji are technically text. As Henning Pohl and his colleagues pointed out recently, instead of sending images of smileys or airplanes, characters representing them are transmitted. They form a logographic writing system. Thus, they can be used in email subject lines, in usernames on social media, and in URLs in certain domains. This seems to contradict Dershide and Seaver's criticism that emoji are limited because they are unlike alphabetical writing. Next, emoji have a large and varied vocabulary. There are currently over 3,300 Unicode emoji in existence that are used around the world. And they represent a number of different categories, such as smileys and emotion, faces, people and body parts, especially hands, components such as skin, tone, hair, and style, animals and nature, food and drink, travel and places, activities and events, objects and clothing, and so forth. In other words, they can express things, actions, feelings, times, places, and symbols. In linguistic terms, this is the emoji lexicon. Third, emoji are words. The Oxford Dictionaries chose the face with tears of joy emoji as the 2015 word of the year, and its entry even included a Latin translation. Emoji can also substitute meaningfully for words, as in these popular song lyrics. It's hard to look right at you, baby, but here's my number, so call me maybe. This shows that emoji have semantics. Emoji also combine to create new words. Combined emoji can preserve the the pronunciation of their components, as in anchor man and iPhone, or concepts can combine, such as singer, which is literally man microphone, and homeless, which is literally no house, sad. A concept and an emoji pronunciation can also co-occur, as in this example, which means the hardest part. Diamond represents the concept of hard, and the art palette represents the sound of art. This shows that emoji have morphology. And this is also evidence against Cohn's claim that emoji do not allow building units from parts. Emoji also combine in phrases the building blocks of sentences. We find noun phrases such as chicken soup, adjective noun phrases such as happy boy and colorful moist lips. Moist there is an umbrella. Adverbs such as shyly admire and seriously ill. And the adverb adjective phrase, which means effing crazy, where the first two emoji represent an act of sexual intercourse. And I'll leave you to figure that out for a moment. This is evidence that emoji have syntax. Also, using only emoji, you can form sentences. You can make statements such as, I love coffee. You can ask questions such as, when does school start? Literally question wristwatch school. Refer to the future. I can talk soon. Literally, I soon talk. And describe the past. In the past, children teased me about my buck teeth. Literally, back when children teased me who had buck teeth. The last two sentences contradict Dershite and Seaver's claim that tense cannot be represented through emoji. Moreover, case can be indicated through the position of subject and object in the clause or the sentence. Notice that I translated the last sentence example as children teased me and not I teased children. The interpretation depends in part on word order, which in this example follows the English order of subject, verb, object. Word order disambiguates in Chinese emoji language as well, although there the basic order is OVS. Thus, the second example on the bottom, literally, you thank I, means I thank you, and not you thank me. This is especially interesting because the basic word order of Chinese is SVO, like English, not OVS. The Sino-Weibo order contradicts Cohn's claim that linear order follows the agent action pattern. Not convinced yet? Here's even stronger evidence of syntax. One emoji clause can be embedded in another, at least on Sino-Weibo. Consider this sequence. Late at night, I thank my dog, who is an angel. The main clause is, I thank my dog, and the subordinate or relative clause is, my dog is an angel. You can see this in the tree diagram on the right. Or consider this sequence of three emoji, which roughly translates as, don't you give me that look. It actually has two embedded clauses. You look at me, I disapprove of your look, and the main clause, don't do it. The tree diagram on the right is my attempt to represent the syntactic relations between the clauses. These last two examples show that emoji sequences can contain embedded clauses, even though Cohn doubted that that was possible. Of course, no real language could function without discourse markers, elements like, of course, that introduce and transition between clauses. There are examples in my data of emoji functioning this way too. The first one is but, you got to admit, where the peach represents the but, B-U-T-T. The second example, truth to tell, where the angel represents truth, conceptually. And the last one, listen, it's complicated, where an ear represents listen. Finally, emoji can also perform speech acts. As in this example, did you just break up with me? Thumbs up. Cool guy, thumbs up. And this one, hey, are we still not talking? Poop emoji, okay. Like in verbal language, these emoji uses are understood to perform actions, such as confirmation and rejection, that go beyond their literal meanings. Emoji that appear with text also modify the speech act or the illocutionary force of the text, very often, such as in the example at the bottom of the slide, where the blowing a kiss emoji mitigates the imposition of the request in the text Does anyone teach me? Does anyone can teach me English? In these and other ways, emoji have pragmatics. So emoji are language-like, but a couple of caveats are in order. First, what I presented isn't the whole picture. There are exceptions to the patterns that I showed, as well as other patterns that don't map onto verbal language, but that are rather particular to emoji. Second, emoji aren't yet a complete, fully functional language, but they do show strongly emergent trends, especially in China. They're best considered a pre-language, like pidgins and creoles, or early child language. And this notion of a pre-language comes from Talmy Gavan in 1979. Now, I mentioned that the evolution of emojis is more advanced in Asia. Why is that? Well, first, emoji originated in Japan. Also, historically, China and Japan have image-based writing systems whose characters somewhat resemble emoji, as you can see in this chart. Another reason is Asian culture and the popularity of anime, which features cartoons like this one, which looks a lot like an emoji with squinting eyes. Also, there's the Japanese culture of kawaii, or cute, which extends to representations of objects. Asia leads in creation and use of stickers as well as emoji. It should now be clear that emoji are not a universal language. Besides a different basic word order, the Sina Weibo platform has special emoji that differ in form and sometimes in meaning from Unicode emoji. For example, if you look at the emoji on the bottom left of the slide, this is supposed to represent a slapped face, which can translate as can't do, or I'm not able to do it, or oh shucks, or oh gee, and this is not a concept that is easily translated into English. Even when the same Unicode emoji have different semantics in different cultures, even the same Unicode emoji can have different meanings in different cultures. For example, the poop signifies good luck in Japan, but that's not how it's used in North America. It's usually used jokingly to refer to shit or something being shitty. The angel signifies virtue in the United States, but death in China. And some hand gestures that are positive in the US are obscene elsewhere, such as the OK sign in North America, which has an obscene meaning in Brazil and Turkey, and other hand gestures which mean your partner is unfaithful, sexual intercourse, or other obscene meanings in other countries. So in summary, the internet provides a unique window on language change. I've argued that sociolinguistic methods for studying language change can be adapted and applied to Graphicons. And this approach has shown that the pragmatic uses of Graphicons evolve with age. Emoji, which are currently at the peak of their popularity, show signs of conventionalizing, suggesting future decline following along the pattern of emoticons. But simultaneously, emoji are developing systematic language-like properties, which suggest that they will continue to spread in the future. So in closing, I want to leave you with some food for thought in the form of 3 questions. First, can a symbol system be considered a language if it has no spoken counterpart? Well, of course, there are sign languages which do not have a spoken counterpart. So it would seem that the answer to that could be yes, but one could debate. In that case, can it be acquired as a first language by children? Could children acquire emoji, for example, as a first language? It seems very far-fetched. But of course, children do acquire sign languages, and we also have some anecdotal evidence that very young children send emoji, especially sequences of emoji, when they're playing with adults' phones. And so it will be very interesting to see in the future how the very, very youngest generation will use emoji, and whether they will introduce grammar, more grammar, into that usage in a way similar to the way that children acquiring a pidgin convert it into a Creole, which has more of a grammatical structure. And finally, can we say that there has been language change if the changes take place only online? And this is a question I've been wrestling with for a while. We do have evidence of some textual CMC innovations that have spread into offline usage. But what about emoji? There's some evidence that people use emoji in other contexts, on television, for example, on billboards. So maybe we're starting to see that as well. But I would like to suggest that CMC is now competing with speech as a primary mode of human communication. And so when we talk about the language, maybe we shouldn't just be talking about the spoken language, but about online language as well. And with that, I thank you. I would be happy to answer any questions or comments. And if you'd like more information about the research that I talked about that I and my team carried out, you can go to my website at indiana.edu. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan, for your very interesting and intriguing talk. To be honest, I have lots of things going on my mind about this subject you brought us today. But I think we have time for comments and questions from the audience. So Andre is going to mediate the communication through the chat. And I think you received the questions and comments. So Andre, please go ahead.
Hello again, Professor Susan. I'd just like to say this again in Portuguese to the audience so they can feel free to ask their questions in Portuguese and then I translate into English. So I'll just say this in Portuguese now, briefly. Quem estiver aí assistindo pode mandar as perguntas em português mesmo e eu traduzo para inglês sem nenhum problema, tá bem? But first, I'd like to mention a few things that I myself wrote as you presented, Professor Susan. The first of which is to highlight the use of stickers in your presentation. You have stickers of yourself, which is amazing. And it's kind of a way of we having ourselves represented in these new Graphicons, strategies for communication in these virtual environments of communication. And also, do you know the app WhatsApp?
Yes.
Do you use it, or do you just know it, by?
I don't use it. I'm of course familiar with it primarily because I teach a course on computer-mediated discourse analysis, and students analyze their own data in that course. And a number of students over the years have chosen WhatsApp data to analyze. I understand it's very popular. It's more popular outside the U.S. than it is in the U.S. So my students who have studied it have been from India, from East Asia, South America, but not so much from the U.S.
I'd risk to say that this is perhaps the most famous app, a synchronous messaging app used in Brazil. I don't have the statistics for this, but I'd risk to say this. And in fact, curiously enough, I don't believe here in Brazil, at least, this difference between emoticons and emoji is well established, like popularly speaking, at least, because WhatsApp, for instance, only calls emoji the yellow faces Graphicons. Mm-hmm. So human representations or animal representations or nature representations do not count as emojis for WhatsApp descriptions, at least. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, people, in general, might call everything emoji, even the, 2 dots and parentheses smiley face, because popularly this is not well established here in Brazil, I guess. So this is something we learned from your talk now, which is obviously great.
May I respond to that? Because that's very, very interesting. I wasn't aware that it was like that in Brazil. But I know that is the case in Asia, in East Asia, actually, that they don't make a clear distinction between what for us, it's very clearly different, ASCII emoticons, emoji, and stickers. Particularly the notion of stickers in Asia, because I've been working with Jingji on stickers also in WeChat in China, which is very popular, similar to WhatsApp. And for us as as Westerners to look at that and say, what are you calling stickers? These things are, some of them are smaller and some of them are bigger and some of them are photographs and some of them are graphical. And yes, we can see that there's some emoji there, some what we call emoji. And then in the research literature about Graphicons in China, or coming from Asia, people will use the word emoji to refer to everything, although we use the word emoticon to refer to everything, including stickers. So they in Chinese, apparently there is only one word. And you can tell me how it is in Brazilian Portuguese, but in Chinese, there is one word that can refer to emoticons, emoji, and stickers. Whereas in the United States, we didn't even have a word until we invented the word Graphicon to refer to everything.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I believe here in Brazil, and people who are watching us can comment on that as well. I believe that here we do have the words emoticon and emoji, though we use them similarly in general. But we do make a difference between that, emoticons / emojis, and stickers. That's a clear distinction for us.
Okay.
As stickers would be the bigger ones, sometimes animated, sometimes not. There's a question for you now, not a comment from myself. A question from the audience, which is how did your research interest emerge, or perhaps how did it shift from traditional linguistic structure to non-standard linguistic language uses, such as Graphicons and alternative typography, orthography, and so forth?
So there are two shifts. One is, how did I get interested in computer-mediated communication in the first place? Because I wrote my dissertation on tense and aspect in Tamil oral narrative. And I did field work in South India for 2 years. But when I came back to the United States after being in India, the internet was just starting to become accessible, especially where I was at UC Berkeley, which was one of the earlier hubs. And I got really intrigued by the dynamics of online communication. So that was in 1990. And I started off studying gender patterns in online communication because they seemed very obvious to me and nobody else was talking about them. But for the entire 90s, I was schizophrenic. On the one hand, I was continuing to do the work that I was trained to do, traditional, historical, descriptive, grammatical linguistics. And on the other hand, I was very interested in this new phenomenon, and I was developing new methods and techniques for studying CMC. How did I switch from textual CMC to graphical CMC? Well, the CMC was becoming more graphical. And so in the starting, really, even by 2000, it didn't seem responsible to not talk about graphics because they were so much a part of computer-mediated discourse. So I've been interested in graphical CMC for a while. And then the real trigger, I should say, was that I was supposed to write a book. I was on sabbatical and I was going to write a book about graphical computer-mediated discourse. And I outlined the book, and I realized in the outline that there was some areas where there was no research. And one of them was Graphicons, and what we called Graphicons. And so I had a student at the time, who was a PhD student who was just starting in the program, Ashley Danis, and she was interested in graphical online communication. And we said, let's do this study of Facebook and look at all these graphical means of communication. And that was how we started. We identified the notion of Graphicons, and we saw that emoji were the most frequent. And so from there on, we kind of drilled down into emoji, and that's the story.
One professor from the Federal University of Espírito Santo here in Brazil has just said in the comment section here in YouTube that she, after watching and hearing your talk, she went to Google to search for the difference between emojis and emoticons, just reaffirming that here in Brazil, this is not something well established. On the other hand, Andrea is asking you something, perhaps a dialectal difference between some emojis. Here in Brazil, you know that emoji of a heart kiss, that the emoji is sending a little kiss.
Mm-hmm.
So Andrea is asking that here is saying that here in Brazil, this emoji somehow came to mean that the person who sent it wants to close the talk in a delicate manner. In English, does it happen the same way? Is there another meaning associated to it? How is it in English?
So again, this is wonderful to learn about these cultural differences. No, I don't think so. In English, it doesn't function that way. We do have emoji can be used to close the conversation. That's not a convention that I've seen in my data. I think that there's a variety of different emoji and that it would depend on the context. But that's very interesting, and thank you for telling me about it. Tell me more about how these Graphicons are used in Brazil.
It's sometimes gonna what's sometimes gonna happen is the person sends this emoji, this cute kiss emoji, and then if the other person continues to send lots of messages, the first person can keep on sending the emoji, the heart emoji, heart kiss emoji, in a manner to try to close the talk.
Just giving lots of kisses. So
yeah.
It's like when we close a letter by saying love and kisses, right?
Yes, precisely.
Right? So kiss, 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 kiss. Yeah.
Yeah, and another question now from Livia, which connects to Andrea's question. There are other questions as well, but these one connect. Livia is asking, that emoji with the thoughtful face. I think I can call it this thoughtful face.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can use it here in Brazil as a question mark. In English, does it function the same way?
I wouldn't be surprised if it did, but I can tell you that we definitely have examples from Chinese where we have questioning face used almost like the interrogative "why" or "how is it? How is it possible?" So yes, definitely happens in the Chinese data.
I see. Now there's a question by Ludovic Vetea. I'm not sure how to if I pronounced the name correctly. And the question is, if emojis are a pre-language, what steps do you think would be necessary for it to become a fully fledged language?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So Tommy Gavon, in his talking about pre-language, also talks about different processes that rudimentary systems follow before they become to have full complete grammar. He talks about syntacticization. So for example, clauses that are coordinated, like one clause and then another clause, tend to become more integrated syntactically. So there's more evidence of embedding of different kinds. So the embedding examples that I show you, we have just a handful of them. We really don't have a lot of examples. They are not that common, and they are only in the Chinese data. So there would need to be a lot more of that. We haven't yet, so I said case marking, we can see case in word order. We definitely have some evidence, fairly strong evidence of word order in the Chinese data, which is quite remarkable because the word order is not a common word order in the verbal languages of the world, OVS. So that would become more systematic, and we would of course want to see it in other languages as well. But let's just take the Chinese case because that's the more advanced case. What else would need to happen? Well, there would need to be more systematicity. So right now, for example, we see there's a very strong tendency for the subject to come after the verb. And there's different kinds. There's no formal personal pronouns, but people use various emoji to represent first person, second person, and third person. But there's a lot of variability. So there's a handful of things that people commonly use to represent the first person or third persons or whatever. So we would expect to see the options become narrowed and more focused in on a specific set rather than this sort of free-form creativity. Those are just some things. We don't have, I mean, a lot of notions are being expressed already in ways that are kind of similar to pigeons, right? So for example, plural is represented by just reduplication of emoji. I think we would perhaps expect to see that there becomes some kind of a morphological indicator that would indicate things like plural. Tense and forward and backward, we're saying, I mean, future and past seem to be expressed pretty well through the forward and back emoji. In Chinese, we're also seeing aspectual indications through reduplication. But again, we might expect that rather than just repeating a number of emoji, that there would become some kind of emoji that would represent these distinctions in a more concise way. So increasing systematicity, increasing conciseness and focus. And of course, for a real, to be a real language, people have to be able to create their own emoji. There has to be that flexibility of innovation. And there are platforms that allow users to create emoji, so it's not out of the question. But for the most part, people use Unicode emojis from their phones, for example, and they are not able to create new ones. So I think we would want to see also an increased, and in Asia they can. There is more opportunities to create your own Graphicons in Asia than there are in the United States. But there are some opportunities in the US as well. And of course, a real language would be one that could be acquired by children, as I hinted at the end. And so we would also want to see evidence of children learning this language as a linguistic system, and probably making it more syntactic. I mean, increasing the process of syntacticization, because that's what typically happens when children learn a pidgin and transform it into a Creole, which has more grammatical structure. So those are some of the things that would have to happen, and that I see happening. I mean, in the Asia case, in the Chinese case.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that we can create our own stickers perhaps is a bridge to doing what you just said, like people creating their own emojis. Perhaps, I don't know, like you created your own sticker for your presentation. Mm-hmm. And I think that this connects to a question I would like to ask you. You mentioned an electronic grammar, which does not imply that there is only one grammar, one possibility for language use in electronic environment. And you also mentioned emoji grammar. Would you say that emoji grammar is like part of this broader electronic grammar, or would you say that those are two different things? And electronic grammar is one thing composed, for example, by a morphology and syntactic constructions used in electronic environments. And on the other hand, we would have emoji grammar, or perhaps Graphicon grammar, composed by other elements other than traditional linguistic elements that compose language use. Is my question clear?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, which shows that you have read some of my publications.
Yes.
I would include emoji under e-grammar, electronic grammar, in the sense that we, as I've hopefully persuaded you through my talks today, that we can talk about it at the levels of structure and meaning and syntax. And so in that sense, it's amenable to linguistic analysis in a way that's similar to text and CMC grammar. But at the same time, and this is something that I'm working on with G, there are some features of this emoji grammar on Sina Weibo that are not features of verbal language, that seem to be characteristic of this emoji language itself. And so we're working now on a description of the syntax of the Sina Weibo emoji language, and it's going to include some other patterns, sort of strong patterns that we see in the data. For example, the use of bracketed sequences where you have an emoji at the beginning and an emoji at the end that are the same or that are semantically similar. And so there's these kinds of bracketed units that we see that are quite frequent in our data. That's not something that's common at all in speech. So it's going to be interesting. We haven't fully fleshed out what exactly those emoji-specific grammatical features are going to be, but but we'll follow a traditional kind of grammar structure in or framework in laying out the grammar of the language, because I think we can speak, maybe not so much to phonetics and phonology, or even orthography, but we can speak certainly to morphology and to syntax and semantics and pragmatics and discourse phenomena.
Juliana just made a comment that related to what you said earlier about creating our own emojis. Juliana asked, the company Apple, actually it's not a question, it's a comment. She asked, the company Apple certainly invested on these DIY emojis with the so-called memojis. You can customize your own characters as yourself and use different facial expressions. I didn't know that. I'm not sure if you did. So I think
well,
this is
in fact, I do, because that's what I've been researching in the past year is Animoji and Memoji. On the iPhone, starting with the iPhone 10, these are large format emoji, the Animoji themselves, that mimic the movement of the face, the eyebrows, the head motion, the mouth in real time. And they can be used in text messages, or they can be used to video chat. And memojis are human heads. In fact, I was going to include a memoji in this talk, but then I thought, well, let's just focus on the emoji. They're human heads that are customizable. So people make them look like themselves. And in fact, the stickers of myself were actually created from my memoji and memoji that I created on my phone. Allows you to convert the stickers. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'm not an Apple user, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I have a research project that's been going on for the past 2 years, studying Animoji and Memoji, and we've published 3 papers about it in 2020. So if anybody's interested, you can go to my website, and there's a link to my publication pages, and all of my publications, except for the books, are available for free from there.
That's perfect. Now, there's a question by a professor from our program here at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. It's a question from Cecilia Molica. She asked you if in your sample, if you took into account the multimodal aspect of memes, for example, or in your research, not necessarily attached to emojis, do you take these multimodal aspect of memes into consideration?
So in the original Graphicon study, which was on Facebook comment threads, we did include image memes as examples of Graphicons if they were used in a response, just in the thread, rather than just simply shared, like because this is funny. We're like, oh, look, here's this funny thing. We made a distinction between use versus mention, following this philosophical distinction in linguistics between whether you're using a word or just mentioning it. So if I say, F you, being rude to you, tell you to F off or something, that's use. But I could also, as a linguist, say that I am analyzing the word fuck as it occurs in this discourse. So that's the distinction we made. And so we didn't consider the cases of people were just mentioning these stickers, but actually using them to communicate, stickers and images. But we didn't in that study. We simply talked about their functions and didn't delve into them too deeply. But Ashley Danis is now writing her doctoral dissertation on GIFs and how people understand them or misunderstand them in computer-mediated discourse. And there has been some interesting work that's been done on image memes by Pat Samermit and Tollins, forget Tollins' first name, at UC Santa Cruz. They've done a couple of interesting papers about memes. And then also, who else is, Limor Shifman in Israel has also done a lot of good work about memes. So people are looking at them, and they are very interesting.
Do you think we have time for 2 more questions, perhaps?
I certainly do. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So one question is again by Andrea. Andrea Quadro is asking you if you could give us or mention a few examples of emojis that has undergone change? Because she's saying that here in Portuguese, I believe she studies emojis here in Brazil, in Brazilian Portuguese. And she's saying that here in Brazilian Portuguese, we do have emojis that have undergone change in the meaning that they unveil. Do you see anything like this in English?
Well, yes, especially in reference to taboo words, which makes sense, right? Because the languages tend to create alternative ways to express taboo concepts. And so the eggplant emoji, for example, in English is used to represent the male genitalia. And the peach is used to represent the, as I showed in the example of a butt, the human derriere. And to the point where it's almost impossible to use the eggplant emoji in any other way because it so strongly has those associations. And there's humorous stories that are told where older people who don't understand that usage will use an eggplant, like to say, something like, I like eggplant, or we're cooking eggplant for dinner or whatever. We'll use the eggplant emoji, much to the amusement of their younger, children or whoever is reading them. And so one interesting study that we did was we conducted a survey about how people understand emoji when they occur in actual context of use on Facebook. And we found interesting age differences. We looked at gender, we looked at age, not so strong gender differences, but interesting age differences. And the older people tended to interpret the emoji in their literal sense, in the sense of what they literally represent, or else they said that they didn't understand how they were being used, especially older males. In contrast, especially to younger females who had more nuanced interpretations, understood the emoji to have taken on more secondary or contextual functions. Another example, it's been claimed, young people, they use emoji, it's like a separate language. They use them differently from adults. Another example that I came across in the literature is the use of the gas pump emoji, which apparently is used in some context of younger people to represent drugs use. So yes, definitely there are these secondary meanings. It would be interesting if these meanings actually, I think the eggplant emoji is probably the best example I can think of, but if these secondary meanings actually became the primary meanings and the original meaning was lost, that would be compelling evidence of semantic change.
I guess that this is what happens or has happened or is happening to the emoji of peach, for example. I believe so. I'm not, saying that with conviction, but I don't know. I think so. And this connects to a question that I would like to make myself again. In your paper called Grammar and Electronic Communication from 2019, you mentioned a few things about the uses of non-standard features in standard writing. And you said that this may vary according to the literacy level of the people who are using these non-conventional linguistic items, such as Graphicons, in traditional writing, as in traditional paper writing. You said something like, rather than e-grammar causing low literacy, it could be that people with lower literacy skills gravitate toward more casual, lazy uses, and people with higher literacy gravitate toward more creative uses. Could you elaborate on that a little bit for us to, as a final question, perhaps?
That was actually something that I learned from reading the literature, not from my own research. And so I don't know how much I can add to that, really. But I thought that it was interesting because there is a debate in the literature about non-standard features. And now we're not talking about emoji, but talking about the use of non-standard computer-mediated communication, sometimes referred to as texties or webies or whatever. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. And so studies have been done of, especially of young people in educational contexts. And there's a kind of a popular prejudice, I guess you could say, that people who use these non-standard spellings, for example, or they write the word, you as the letter U, or see you later, L and then number 8, and then R, that these are defective or deficient forms of literacy. And it started to become an issue because young people, of course, are online a lot, and when they write their assignments for their teachers, sometimes they will use this textese, emoji, or CMC features in their writing. So it was interesting that these studies were done, which showed that the people who used those features were actually kind of demonstrating that a secondary literacy, if you will, that they could control different registers of language, and that they were capable of also using standard language and being good students, basically. But then there are also these interesting studies that find that there are certain non-standard features that are more likely to be used, the creative ones, and that was the sentence that you pulled out. There's more creative non-standard features are actually used by the good students versus the sort of more like mundane, if you will, non-standard features were associated with these more, lower achievement levels and certain other personality characteristics that could be considered negative. So that, I thought that was very interesting because it makes a distinction that not all these CMC features are alike. That some can be more creative and others not.
Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. Thank you so much for this conversation. And now I will ask Professor Christina to come in back again to the official closure of your lecture. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Andre, for moderating.
Brilliant and interesting and great talk, great discussion. Unfortunately, we are about to finish this session today, and hope to see you again with us here in Brazil. Okay, so thank you very much. Would you like something else?
No, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and thanks to all the people who are watching on YouTube, I guess, for your comments, which I will put into Google Translate so that I can understand them all.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much again. So, amanhã, então, continuamos com o nosso seminário, webinar, nosso webinário, e então nos vemos nesses próximos 2 dias.